Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us wherever you are, and special greetings to those of you following us via YouTube Live from Africa and around the world. My name is Ratu Vanarivo, and I am a Senior Program Management Officer at the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, or OSA. I am privileged to co-host this exchange with my sister Lebo Disway, who is our Public Information Officer here at OSA. Good morning, Lebo. And we welcome you to this first youth stage at the 2024 edition of the Africa Dialogue Series, or ADS. This year's theme is Education through Science, Technology, and Innovation toward the Africa we want. To find out more about the ADS or the Africa Month at the United Nations, please visit our website at www.un.org/OSA. Today, we have a great program and a fantastic lineup of panelists who will share their ideas and experiences leveraging STEM education to generate quality jobs for young Africans. After those exchanges, the second part of our time will be dedicated to an interactive discussion where we will take questions from the audience. To participate, you can raise your hand and send questions or send questions through the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform. Or if you are following via YouTube Live, the chat feature on the YouTube Live window. And if you want to connect with us on social media and amplify this conversation, feel free to do so and use the hashtag ADS2024. As we are getting ready to start, we are privileged today to have Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, Director of Policy, Monitoring, and Advocacy at OSA, to set the stage for us. Jean-Paul, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Rado. Thank you very much, Rado. And good morning to all from Addis, and good morning to all from New York. I think I'm still in Addis. I was previously based in Addis. And good afternoon to all those who are based on the continent or elsewhere and following our discussions. And thank you so much for joining us for this Africa Month, leading up to, of course, Africa Day on the 26th of May. And the youth platform is particularly important in view of youth platforms are always important, but in the current year, we have a particular event leading up to at the end of the year, which is the Summit for the Future in September. And this Summit for the Future will also feature a pact for future generations, recognizing that a lot of the challenges that we are facing today also have real impacts for the future, have real impacts in terms of the type of world that we want to live in. And perhaps no more than any other region, African young people will have a say in determining what the future will look like because of Africa's prospective demographic dividend. And it is very important that as we look towards this pact to the future, we do not just rely on the established UN processes, but we continuously to find ways to reach out to young people, to share their experiences, to share their thoughts. And I would like to urge all of you, do not hesitate to be as ambitious or radical as you feel in these discussions, because we need to move dramatically beyond the status quo. We need accelerators, we need catalysts for change, and we need to recognize that the existing pathway doesn't take us where we need to be. So we need those factors that will dramatically change the trajectory that we are on and allow us potentially to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We are only 6 years away from the target year. But nonetheless, we have seen, based on previous experience, that acceleration is possible. And things, once you have unlocked certain game changers, things can accelerate to a level where there are rapid and dramatic improvements. In the context of STEM education for the fourth industrial revolution, which is one of these game changers, there are, I would say, in terms of the policy environment, significant positive developments that have taken place. At the level of the continent and the African Union, with the African Union Summit recently adopted in January the second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063, which underlines the opportunity to boost the empowerment and productivity of African citizens, in particular by harnessing the power of science and innovation. This is also situated within ambitious strategies at the level of individual countries. But we should recognize that having the policy framework is just one part of the equation. We still need dramatic investments by governments into educational systems, and particular educational systems that are adapted to make the most of the fourth industrial revolution. And this starts with investments in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. The youth demographic dividend also will not happen automatically. It is about preparing for the future by recognizing that just having numbers is not sufficient. We need young people who are equipped to make the changes themselves that are needed, and having therefore a view of leadership which is not just, for example, about positions or about even politics. It's about technical skills. Leadership is very much about having those technical skills which can allow these dramatic improvements, these game changes to take place within the fourth industrial revolution. We should note that in terms of higher education in STEM fields, we are significantly behind. In Africa, it is estimated that fewer than 25% of higher education students are pursuing STEM fields of study. And perhaps even more concerning, fewer than 30% of those who are participating in STEM fields are women. So we have a dramatic effort that is required to address inclusion. In terms of bridging the skills gap, the technologies nonetheless can allow, in some cases, the retraining of young people to better adapt to emerging opportunities. This includes using artificial intelligence, recognizing the risks that are associated, but also being able to work smarter by harnessing such technologies to improve outcomes. This includes using big data, opportunities to tap into the Internet of Things and robotics, all with a view of gaining efficiencies and being able to benefit from the opportunities that are going to be inherent within the demographic dividend across the continent. We also need to have ownership by young people of the economic opportunities that are associated with STEM education, with a better preparation of a workforce through STEM education, and the opportunities that emerge from innovation and entrepreneurship. This means rethinking how entrepreneurship is taught, looking at educational systems and universities that are actually actively engaged around entrepreneurship, linking this with incubators and with opportunities to directly innovate within sectors and creating those stronger linkages between educational institutions and the workforce and industrial sectors, and in particular where it concerns research and design. We also need to be very focused on where future jobs are going to come from. And certainly there are dramatic changes in the nature of industrialization globally. There is no longer an expectation that we will have the thousands of factory jobs or, let's say, mining jobs that have been associated with industrialization in the past. The fourth industrial revolution, based on ICT technologies, are more about the development of a knowledge economy and how young people will be able to leverage the skills that they have learned to add value through the deployment of these technologies in various ways. And that includes tapping into the opportunities of the African continental free trade area, where, for example, the way in which products are traded dramatically has changed, with increasing access to the internet, even across the continent that, of course, the African continent is still playing catch up in terms of that access, but it is happening at a faster rate than many might imagine. And increasingly, goods and services are being traded digitally, and the digital protocol of the African Continental Free Trade Area will play a key role in stimulating growth opportunities for young people across the continent. Finally, we must also be thinking very carefully about how the private sector must play a role in not only nurturing young people, but in particular facilitating startups that are led by young people. We should not assume that the existing businesses that are dominant today will continue to be the dominant businesses in the future. We need to create space for experimentation and for young people to be able to use to generate businesses that are tackling the problems of the day. All of the Sustainable Development Goals are challenges within which are situated opportunities. The connection of about 600 million African people who currently do not have access to electricity is a social imperative, it is a development imperative, but it is also associated with unlocking the economic potential across the continent. With every additional person that is connected to electricity and that has universal access to energy, to every additional person that has access to the internet creates a potential growth hub for the continent, and for which we hope we can situate young people to make the most of. And this is particularly grounded in access to STEM education. And we look forward to hearing from young people on how this can be improved, both in terms of gaps that may exist in existing policies, in terms of access to finance and capital, particularly for young people that are involved in startups, and in terms of the policy environment at the global level, including through the United Nations. What do we need to do to change the scenario? What are the game changers, and how can young people play a role in delivering those game changers? Thank you very much for having invited me to say a few words at the start on behalf of the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, and in particular on behalf of the Under-Secretary General, Christina Duarte. We are delighted to hear from all of you and look forward to your recommendations. Thank you very much.
Merci, merci, Jean-Paul. Thank you very much for these inspiring words. It is a clear call to action that I am sure our young participants will take to heart as we engage in ambitious, action-oriented exchanges that would propose solutions to mobilize policymaking to accelerate Africa's development. Without further ado, let me give the floor to our wonderful co-moderators today. We have Ms. Betania Lulu Beranu, Director of the Youth in Action, or Y-ACT organization, and Mr. Christopher Sigateng, Deputy Secretary General of the Pan-African Youth Union. Betania, Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rojo, and thank you so much, Honorable Jean-Paul, for your welcoming remarks. I know Jean-Paul for a long time. He's a very strong advocate of youth participation and youth leadership. So it's a huge pleasure to have you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Betania, as said. I lead the Youth in Action program at Amref Health Africa in Nairobi. I'm also the youth coordinator for YALDA, which is a Youth Alliance for Leadership and Development in Africa. So strong Pan-African at heart, ensuring that young people are leading policy spaces in Africa. Today, we'll be delving into this critical role that STEM education plays in shaping the continent's future. And joining me, we have the moderator and 4 amazing speakers. And I'll pass the floor to Christopher to introduce himself, and then give the floor for our speakers to introduce themselves as well. Chris, over to you.
Thank you so much, Betania. And I'd also like to give shout out to Jean-Paul We continue, drinking from his wealth in the space, and that is something we are very appreciative of. I also like to take this opportunity to delve into the conversation, but to share also that my name is Christopher, as already alluded. I'm the Deputy Secretary for the Pan-African Youth Union, which is the umbrella body for all the National Youth Council in the continent and its equivalent structures, as well as the regional bodies. So we continually advocating for issues of youth development and empowerment with our member states and member countries. Locally, I also run an NGO that empower unemployed young people with access to job opportunity. That also brings the issue of STEM education and also how we want to find it into navigating through the world of work and having economic empowerment as well. So I'm very glad to be co-hosting with Betania and the other really, inspiring speakers from the continent. So I'll briefly just give them to introduce themselves as well. Miss Abby.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much to the UN Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, the AU mission to the UN, UNESCO, and IOM for the invitation to participate today. My name is Rakia Abifara. I'm currently a health policy and management graduate student at Columbia University, Mailman School of Public Health here in New York. I'm also the co-president of the African Global Health Network at Mailman, which aims to provide mentorship and advance public health initiatives and research in Africa and the diaspora. I'm very passionate about youth and women's empowerment, global health, and climate justice in Africa. Having served as an Innovations for Social Change consultant with the United Nations Population Fund in Uganda, I've worked closely with young people, especially under the With Youth pillar and Generation for Generation dialogues under the Live Your Dream campaign. I've witnessed firsthand how the transformative power of innovative partnerships, along with incubators, accelerator programs, and pipeline mentorship initiatives, change the way youth-led startups are driving social change and can be and empowering young people to be change makers, innovators, and entrepreneurs. With the fourth industrial revolution upon us, there are many opportunities to empower young Africans with the skills and knowledge they need to thrive in the evolving healthcare space, a priority sector for growth and employment. Through breaking digital health innovations, emergency care systems, biomedical research, including the development of vaccines, solar-powered health facilities, and more, the potential for STEM-educated youth to make an impact in health care outcomes is huge. So as mentioned by Mr. Honorable Jean-Paul, the African Union's 2063 agenda recognizes the value of STEM education in Africa's development. The conference could not have come at a better time. I look forward to sharing my insights on how STEM education can be leveraged to transform the demographic dividend to create employment opportunities within public health. Thank you.
Thanks, Rakia. Peter?
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Kwesi Koji. I'm the Secretary General for the All Africa Students Union. ASU, for those of us who do not have knowledge about it, is the umbrella organization for students of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora. So basically, we mobilize from the primary level to the secondary level. We do work around 7 strategic priorities, mainly climate advocacy. We do work around education and students' rights. We do work around Pan-Africanism and African culture. We work around capacity building, mainly because we do believe that it is important that we build our skill sets, we build our competences. And also we do mobilize around migration and mobility, amongst other things that we do. We've existed from 1972, and we've done work hand in hand with the African Union, work with the EU. We have consultative status with UNESCO, and basically also championing the policy in education. One of the primary things that we believe in is that education obviously has to be an inherent human right, and that people should not be disenfranchised simply on the basis that they cannot afford to go to school, particularly if we put this within the context of STEM. So we're excited about the opportunity to share what our ideas are and share what perspectives we are to be able to contribute to an Africa that all of us would desire to see. So thank you very much for the opportunity to join you, and I'm happy to share what our perspectives are.
Thank you for joining us, Peter. Over to you, Sandra.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are. My name is Sandra Shoko, the Startup Bay. I am from Zimbabwe, currently in Cape Town, and I am a young person working for the growth of other young people's businesses. So I work for an incubation hub, taking ideas from ideation to commercialization and building strategic partnerships around it. I also happen to be a team lead for an organization called Elevate Trust that works on really bringing STEM education and from a very tender age. You know how people say we are working for young people of the future. We work with them from your primary school, secondary schools, and we do have initiatives called STEM Firm, which take STEM education to young girls, especially in marginalized areas, so in rural schools and in all the other marginalized areas. We also have Innovation Hub clubs, which take the whole idea of complementing your formal education systems to allow a safe space for you to ideate, innovate, because we can't just at the end of the day say we want to see innovators, want to see businesses when you haven't knitted from like the underground. And then we also then work with different government organizations, other organizations around CSOs, just to really build this whole ecosystem where we're all working together. So I think that's about it. A lot of which you hear as I speak, but this is an introduction. Really excited and energetic to be here. I really wish it was a live room because I always love passing the energy, but I hope some of it is just passing through the screen. Yes, so that's a bit about me.
Thank you so much, Sandra. So now let's begin by painting a picture of the current state of STEM education in Africa, and I'll start with you, Sandra. How would you characterize accessibility, quality, and relevance to the fourth industrial revolution? Are there significant disparities between countries or regions? You've said that you come from Zimbabwe, you're working in Cape Town, you do work with a number of youth-led innovations. So how do you see this topic?
All right. Thanks so much for that. I think I'm just going to start off by appreciating where we've come from as a continent in terms of the whole idea of STEM education, right? STEM education has existed time immemorial. And I think for a long time, it was just an aspect that was in school and not a lot of people were enthusiastic about it. The importance of it was not really being put in place. But now you have such things as the science, technology, and innovation strategy that's been put up by AU. You've got AU saying this is the year of education and prioritizing science, technology, and innovation. So that is a big plus to say there is that awareness, and that's an exciting, great starting up space where we can take it from. But as far as now we're looking at the idea of quality, the idea of accessibility, I mean, as just a standpoint globally, we know that over 250 million African children are not in school. This is not just STEM, but generally people are not in school. I think also Jean-Paul mentioned the fact to say we've got only 25% of students actually graduating in STEM education. Yet, if you're going around, the whole narrative going around is, science, tech, innovation, STEM education is going to be this lifting arm for all of us. And yet only 25% are taking that. You also have, in terms of the actual quality, the teacher-student ratio in the classes, if we're looking at the formal structures, I think the second year plan for the African Union is speaking about they want to aim at a 1:30 in primary schools and a 1:15 in secondary schools. So if you're looking at the facts and the states, they're not looking so good. And I mean on a global level, just to like paint it a bit better, and I like to say this so that we're all on the same page. So you only have 1.3% research and development in the world coming from Africa. As big as we are, only 1.3%. You only have 0.1% of patents being found from Africa. And patents are a measure of how much innovation are we bringing into the world. You only have 0.01% coming in terms of published articles. And published articles are supposed to build into what we're then going to work and further develop on and build on as far as business is concerned and other discoveries are concerned. So that is the state that we're working on. On a global scale, we are so far from where we want to be. And more importantly for me, the idea of also just relevance. A lot of the times, even when we have this 25% of STEM students that exist in Africa, and we have whatever we're doing, the research being done, a lot of it is theoretical, right? We learn to, I come from the University of Zimbabwe, and that's where I did my undergrad. And even like here in Cape Town, you have a miles and miles of, of dissertations, thesis published. And that's it. Someone does that and they finish, and there's nothing from that. I don't think the whole idea, and I think for me, the starting point is that mindset shift to say, why am I in school? Why am I learning? What is the greater picture, right? Because a lot of the times from the get-go, we start in a situation where it's just a competitive scenario. You're taught from the get-go that do your work well, don't get copied, excel on your own, and be a top student. And at the end of the day, when you're the top student, what happens? You get grabbed by the Ivy League schools. You're not in Africa, you're not developing anymore. So that idea of collaboration, that idea of actually developing something that works into building the greater solutions that we need, and it's not there. And I think another really important thing is there's no funding, and there's not a lot of funding for our research and development in Africa. A lot of it comes from outside. And when it comes from outside, the problem now it comes with terms and conditions and problems that are from the global north, right? And not our own African solutions. So that's where the gap is. So we do not lack of talent from when I've traveled back in Zimbabwe, even in South Africa, there's so much going on, but we lack in the idea of developing African solutions for our African problems. And that comes when we put our money where our mind is. And that comes when we change the mindset shift to say STEM education has to be collaborative. It doesn't have to just talk about critical thinking. That's not where it stops. It needs to think about how do I solve the daily problems that my community is facing through my own research? How do I develop it? We should be scared to just see a thesis just being placed there and nothing done about it, right? And this is just then moving to the idea of that whole fourth industrial revolution, because the whole idea is a problem that exists today. Best believe after probably a few months it's going to be gone, because things are moving so fast. And once they're developed for us by other people, they come in Africa more expensive. And that increases the whole idea of now we already are facing so many problems. Now we have to buy the solution from elsewhere. Yet we could have invested in that. So it's a whole plethora of so many things. But I think at the center of it really is to say the whole idea of we need to modify our STEM education to speak to the critical problems that we have. And this does not start at a university level. This starts from your 6-year-old. This starts from practical problems just being communicated well. Because the stats may say one thing, but we need to see what actions are we putting in bit by bit. So I think that's just an opening to the current state.
Thank you so much, Sandra. You've shared quite a whole. And what I appreciate from your conversation is that, the appreciation of our numbers as young Africans. And this is something that has been said, that we are a youthful population, which is a powerful resource. Now, maybe just to give to Rakia in terms of how can STEM education be leveraged to transform this young generation in driving the force in the African's economic and social progress. especially looking at our numbers, and how can you utilize that to say the STEM education can be a driving force for Africa's economic progress and social, appreciation. And if there are any other challenges that we might find or face along the way, what could that be?
Thank you so much for the question. So right now, Africa is demographically the world's youngest continent, and by 2050, 1 in 4 people in the world will be African. With this being said, Africa hosts 10 countries with the highest fertility rates globally. However, many of these countries are still in the early stages of the demographic transition. In Kenya and Ghana, fertility rates have been declining and life expectancy has been increasing. However, this is not the case for many other countries within the continent, as there are high percentages of young women having children before the age of 18, where there are discriminatory laws that ban pregnant women from attending school and continuing their education, let alone the STEM programs. So to realize the demographic dividend, we need to aggressively invest in research, development, and innovation around women's sexual and reproductive health and address barriers to education and family planning. By empowering young people, particularly young women, by equipping them with the technical skills and opportunities, we can transform the continent's demographic advantage of having a useful population into driving a force of change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rakia, and I'm very glad that you brought out the young women's perspective and how we need to really invest in that, and the inequality that you really brought out in terms of teenage pregnancy, child marriage, to really bring them to par. Now I'm going to go to Peter. So, Peter, we're now going to talk about addressing youth unemployment. As we know, youth unemployment remains a pressing issue in Africa. And how do you think that STEM education can equip young people with the needed skills for decent and sustainable employment, especially with the emerging industries? Are there specific strategies that can be implemented? What do you think?
Okay, all right. So thank you. Maybe before I go into that, I would want to give perhaps a bit of a context into the conversation. So I think that maybe what we haven't done so far is to sort of give ourselves an opportunity to understand the revolutions that it has been and where Africa has been in each step of the way. I think that such an understanding would position our minds to appreciate in terms of where Africa has been in the first, in the second, and third, and now in the fourth. If we are to understand that, then it would give us a bright idea in terms of what we have to do to be able to go around this. So if you look at how the first one, at least in terms of the timings as it is known, you would consider that the first of the revolutions as it has been marked was sometime about the 1760s to the 1840s. This is a time that was marked by the advent of the steam engines, textiles like weaving and all that. Clearly, I mean, by 1760, other than a few African countries that you can say that may have had a modernized way of looking at things, clearly we would not have an idea what this revolution that had come. So clearly, Africa would have missed out on the first one. If you consider that the second one came about from the 1870s to the 1960s, this was a time when, of course, I mean, mass production would start. People would begin to churn out goods and services in the way that we see it now. Clearly, a significant thing happened during such a time. And for those of us who know what our history tells us, this is the Berlin Conference, and this is when Africa was partitioned. And so clearly, such a time also, Africa was obviously not in a position to take advantage of the revolution as it came. Then you go into the third, which is from the 1950s to the 1970s. And again, you realize that almost all the African countries attained independence, starting with Ghana, which is the first in the Sub-Sahara, to gain independence from 1957. And up until the 1960s, where African countries began to gain independence. So you realize that in the third industrial revolution, Africa spent majority of its time fighting for colonial independence. It obviously would mean that in the priority of things, we were not in a position to again take advantage of the third, and now we're in the fourth. So if you look at the context, how it has evolved from the first to the second and the third, realistically, Africa only has the opportunity to take advantage of the fourth. And I think that when we have the conversations, we agree with ourselves that much as we may have missed on the first, we missed the second, and we missed the third, we do not have an excuse to miss out on the fourth. So here we are, we're in a unique position where technology is available. We do have education that has been almost commoditized such that it is accessible to the extent that it is. And we do have a unique opportunity to take advantage of the fourth without an excuse. So now back to the question of how is it that we can leverage on the fourth IR to, as it were, reduce the unemployment that bedevils us as a continent. And we'll have to ask ourselves if at all it is possible to use STEM education to reduce unemployment. And I think that the question is yes. We just have to look, east. If you look at China, they lifted 750 million people from poverty. And they have done that on the back of technology. They've done that on the back of manufacturing. So yes, there is an imperative. There is a case that is presented before us that we cannot argue against to show that STEM education, if we invest in it, it works. So if it works, why are we not doing it? And if at all it works, how then do we take advantage of it? So again, it comes back to the question of every society at some point will go through an inflection point. So at this point, we make drastic changes to our lives, to our systems, to our structures. And so clearly, what has been marked as the next big thing is that Africa certainly will become a manufacturing hub after China. Question is, do we have the skilled labor for something like that? Do we have the skill set? Do we have the competencies? Of course, you'd argue that even in today, what stops Africa from being the manufacturing hub? Because clearly labor is there abundantly, which is a variable that we look at if we're looking at the factors of production. So labor is there. So if labor is there, labor is cheap, why are manufacturing hubs not coming to Africa and are going to China? The answer is that the labor we have is not skilled. And so it begs the question of, if at all we want to say that STEM education is relevant, it's relevant only to the extent that we're able to use it to capacitate ourselves and to build a skilled labor force. It is only then that Africa can leverage on what we call the youth bulge in a way that is able to present us with an opportunity other than a curse. So I do think that, yes, when we answer the question of it can do that. So if it can do that, the next question would be, how do we do that? And I think that one of the key things that has been considered at the AU level is the recognition that innovation is key. So last year in July, the AU-EU launched the AU-EU Innovation Agenda, to recognize that this is in fact important, that Africa and Europe begin to connect on the ideas of green transitions, on innovation and technology. That recognition would obviously cascade down to the member countries to begin to understand that at the core of what we do as a country, we must begin to put STEM education over there. I think that recognition alone would create that domino effect of policies that are trained to recognize that STEM education is indeed important in the way that we address unemployment. If you look at startups, majority of which are young people, we're doing this on the back of technology. We're doing this on the back of innovation, and we're creating jobs. Yes, there are impediments, but of course, the statistics and the data argue and speak for themselves that if at all we make investments in STEM education, we really will yield an outcome that would create the Africa that we want. So I think I'll yield now just to serve as some ideas about what it has been that we've gone through, and again, what it is that we can do to leverage on STEM for the reduction of unemployment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you for noting the different policy steps that have been taken to really emphasize how STEM can be really tapped into for tackling unemployment. And I'll pose the same question to Rakia. Rakia, what do you think?
So I think it's imperative to recognize that industrial development, generating decent jobs, and public health goals are all complementary. Developing the pharmaceutical sector at the local level can lead to economic growth, but also enhance healthcare accessibility and affordability to millions of Africans. We need to prioritize investing in healthcare infrastructure and empowering youth to build a healthier, more prosperous Africa. Approximately 70 to 90% of all drugs consumed on the continent are imported. So this leaves people vulnerable to stockouts. The local production quality of medicine is also important to ensuring a reliable supply chain, reducing dependency on imports, and overall preventing the risks associated with counterfeit or expired drugs, which we saw throughout COVID and even before. So according to the World Health Organization and World Bank, about 400 million people do not have access to the most essential medicine, especially women and children. So building a robust local pharmaceutical industry, localized, and health systems that enhance availability and affordability of essential medicines, promotes research and development, creates opportunities, and strengthens the health infrastructure. We are continuing to see across Africa, women are dying from maternal mortality, preventable maternal mortality across health facilities, especially now due to climate change, with the frequent power shortages and because of the insecurity. Our hospitals, our health facilities need to be adaptive, resilient to climate shocks. Climate change will increasingly affect the health of vulnerable populations, including maternal and fetal health. For every 1 degree Celsius rise, there's stillbirths and premature births go up by 5%, leaving women in Africa to have little to no protection, even in health facilities against extreme heat events. We are constantly witnessing shortages in power, which is impacting the health facilities, vaccine refrigeration, and even the management of health information systems, including electronic health records, right? Because we are relying on this energy. So there's a lot of opportunity, innovation, and partnership that can be done with healthcare to create youth employment. So that is my view when it comes to generating jobs, when it comes to health and employment within STEM.
Thank you so much, Rakia. I think what is also transpiring is that STEM education is not all about technical, impact, but we need to see a lot of innovation. And then this goes to you, Sandra, to say how can we foster a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship amongst the young Africans? And if any other, impactful and inspiring examples that you could share, yeah, that would be very grateful.
All right. Thank you for that. And I think as a starting point, really, it's to highlight the idea of innovation, that innovation has to solve problems. It's not just creating something new. Innovation has to speak to some need that's there, right? And when we speak about STEM education now, it's the basis of it is it gives you, there's a certain discipline that comes with studying, something in STEM. I'm a lawyer by profession, actually. I happen to support STEM education, and that's actually fun. And I can actually appreciate the whole idea of waiting for your results to come out, for the conditions to be well set. That critical thinking, that discipline, that patience plays so much, plays so much when you are now in entrepreneurship, because that's a whole different conversation. But entrepreneurship is a whole journey. It's a roller coaster. It goes up and down. So there's that discipline, there's that critical knowledge, critical thinking that you have. There's the whole idea of it's understanding certain semantics out of it as you're creating certain things. And as someone who works in the incubation space, who works with businesses, one thing I've for a long time seen is, at the end of the day, whatever business you're going to come on board with has to have some aspect of STEM involved in it for it to actually be relevant in the fourth industrial revolution, whether you like it or not. But one thing I would love to demystify right here whilst we're in this space, and I always say this in the same place I get in, that STEM education and science and technology and innovation generally might be something that we can think is for scientists or people in that field, but it's something that we all have a part to play in, right? Because the idea of STEM education and it actually growing out to its full potential has to have the collaboration of different parties. So you've got people that you call social scientists, people that come on board, that come in place to actually bring out the blooming of STEM education for it to actually make proper sense. There has to be that different parties coming together to enhance the power of STEM education, right? So as much as there are the different skills and the different things that come from the actual STEM education, the principles in STEM education need to be inputted in all of us in a different way, because they're so critical to how we are solving our problems as they come on board. It's so fundamental and so critical for all of us to really grasp that idea. And I think, as I'm also speaking on the idea of STEM education, and I think I spoke about this in the very first point, that critical thinking, problem solving, discipline, when it's not put in place with the end goal of it being relevant and actually changing scenarios and actually being innovating and addressing society and community's problems, it becomes pointless. It becomes a paper or books that we keep piling or we keep publishing that don't actually make sense. So the fundamental aspects of it are there, but there has to be the infusion of STEM education with innovation entrepreneurship. It doesn't have to be we're just teaching STEM education. Innovation has to always be ringing at the back of the mind of this. How are we taking our STEM education to research and development, right? And I think it's always an issue that we have, especially when you're in the industry's perspective, where businesses do not actually value the research that's coming from our universities, the research that's coming in from the different spaces, our educational spaces, because for us to keep growing and keep building useful and technologically advanced solutions in the different spheres of the continent, you need to be continuously tapping into the relevant education system that's existing. So it has to be interlinked. Your STEM education has to be interlinked to how do you keep it growing through research and development, and how do these skills keep also growing the current businesses and spaces that exist in that sphere. So I think, just as a conclusive role, is to say, yes, STEM education gives you skills, but these skills are not going to be relevant if you're not going to be thinking about how are they coming in place to be innovative and actually create change. And entrepreneurship is not something that you grab at a later stage. When you're teaching it right here, right at the start, the scientists have to understand that, you know what, I'm making something for the greater good of my community. The social problems are not supposed to just then be told at the end of the day. They come from the right at the beginning of it. So it's all an ecosystem that we have to bring together. And the underlying point of it is STEM education is not just for scientists. We all have a role to play, whoever you are. It's all our role to play if we want to actually see the power of it in our continent.
Excellent. That was a very powerful remark. And I'm taking a lot of notes, and it will be very hard for the moderators to summarize all these great points that you guys are making. I'll pass over to Peter now. Now I want to talk about measuring impact and sustainability. Long-term success, we know that it would require evaluating the effectiveness of these initiatives that we're discussing today. So how do you think we can measure the impact and sustainability of STEM education programs in Africa? And what kind of key performance indicators should we consider, in your view?
Oh, okay, all right. So thank you very much. I think I'll start with a popular saying that you put your money where your mouth is. So obviously that we're going to have to start with looking at where do we put our money, where does our money go? So then we go to our budgets. So if we take a look at what our national budgets are, we'll be looking at how much of that goes into if we're able to track that investments are being made over there, then clearly it tells us that it is an important dynamic on the table of the policy. Nonetheless, if it is clear that governments are not putting money there, then it's clear that on their priority table, regardless of how it is explained, clearly that is not top on the agenda. And I think that obviously then would be that if we're not putting money there, it's not going to fall from the skies. Clearly, investment would have to be made into it. And I think that the second thing that we may want to look at as a KPI, obviously that if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. So then there's every incentive to begin to understand what it is that we're measuring. How does that impact on sustainability? And so the key thing that I would say that we need to measure clearly would be that education, as we say it, obviously must translate into a fitness for purpose outcomes. And clearly it means that universities have that obligation to train people such that when they come out, they are employable. In a normal sense of manufacturing, business and all that, if companies churn out defective products, they recall them. However, if universities churn out graduates that are not employable, they don't have the skills, that they don't have the right competences. Nobody is telling the universities that, look, you're not doing your jobs. It starts from us measuring that as a KPI, us understanding that the universities have an obligation to train people, graduates, young people that are employable. Because if at all we're going to leverage on their skills and their competences, the places where they are trained, we must measure to know what their outcomes are. Because clearly, universities have no interest in investing in knowing that we've churned out 1,000 graduates in a year. How many of them have started their own companies? How many of them have been employed? How many of them are home? This data set is important for us to even formulate the policy on what is working and what is not working, in the absence of which we have no basis of knowing if at all the system is working or not. So I think that we'll go back to where education takes place. Of course, we understand that education does not only take place in the universities, and that we ourselves and then societies have that incentive to also train. But as primary actors in training people, one of the first places that we go as a KPI to understand if at all STEM education is working or not is go back to the places where the universities are. The second thing that I would want to share as a KPI that we may want to look at is, for example, in a year, how many innovations do we have? How many problems? Like I've been said, we don't just innovate just for the sheer sake of doing that, but we do that because we are incentivized to be able to solve a societal problem so that people can do their jobs better, so that agriculture, we can harness more of the crops. We can use AI to solve, problems in the farms. So it has to have a practical bearing. So if at all we're not churning out innovations, then what is the use of the people who go to school to do the STEM and come out? It means clearly that it's not working. So if we lack innovations, if we lack the opportunity to be able to measure how many of our problems have been solved in a time span on account of the STEM, then it means that there's something that is not right. I don't think that we go to school to do engineering with the intention that we want to go and sit at the bank as a teller. Clearly, if that was our foremost intention, we obviously want to do another program. So it means that we intend something when we do an investment, and it has to yield it, in the absence of which we may want to look at that. And again, we would want to ask ourselves that how many young people are starting up entities that are driven by innovations, technology? The measure of if at all it's working is how many startups can we count in the last 2 years, 3 years, and do an analysis to see that the investment that we're making in STEM education is working or not. Because if they do that, we're expecting that they either get mainstream jobs and are employed, or that they have the capacity to start up their own businesses. Of course, we also do that with the understanding that there are investments, there are capital that serves as constraints for people's inability to start up their jobs. And so the only variable here is not simply that they are educated well, but also that there is the ecosystem that allows them to be able to thrive on the knowledge that they have in school to be able to do well. So I think that those would be some of the KPIs that when you sit down to ask ourselves if at all the investments that a country is making in STEM is working or not. These are some of the things we'll be asking ourselves. Are the universities doing what they should do? And are they doing it well? And are they measuring impact? Are they measuring the if at all it is working? And I think that another thing also would be that how many times does industry interface with academia to the extent that we're able to know that they are speaking to themselves, so that we're able to know that in the end, the kind of education that we're churning out in the schools is what we actually need in the industry. That again should give us an idea if at all this would work or not. So I think that those would be some of the KPIs that I imagine that if we paid attention to, we will be able to tell if at all investments in STEM is working or not. I think I'll yield the floor back to you.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I like it how you've pointed out the role of different actors. Often at times university are pointed of producing an unemployable graduate. And for now to say what is the connection between the university and what they would expect to do, it's a really a great submission. But I'll move to you also, or Rakia, to say, despite the potential, we do appreciate that there are obstacles that are hindering integration of STEM education. And according to you, what are some of the primary challenges? And if there are, proposal that you can put forth to say some of the things that can be inculcated so that the workforce that we deem and anticipate of our young people is part of that solutions.
Thank you. I do want to make a quick remark off of Peter's comment, though. I thought he spoke very eloquently. When talking about innovations for social change, I've done a lot with startups in Uganda, specifically with health. So strengthening intellectual property protection laws and regulations are also very key when working with young people. A lot of the times while they're doing the partnerships with private sector, they're not able to get credit for, the work that they do. And also the registration process needs to be more simplified, encouraging more young people to go into this space. Going into the other question, thank you, Christopher. A major gap in the low participation and a weak pipeline in STEM fields are key obstacles or big obstacles when it comes to gaps in bridging gaps within STEM and education systems. With less than 25% of higher education students pursuing STEM, less than 30% are women, and only 18 to 30% of science researchers are women. After having the pleasure of attending the 2023 Africa Conference last year, it was shocking to learn about the underrepresentation of African authorship in public health literature and publications. Researchers from sub-Saharan Africa are underrepresented, even among studies conducted in their country, regarding STEM. African perspectives in STEM must be included and recognized to address the challenges, create solutions, and influence policymaking within and outside of the continent. So improving ICT infrastructure, resources, and such are important when talking about advancing STEM education in Africa. Currently, many educational institutions face challenges such as limited access to electricity, as mentioned earlier by Mr. John Paul, and internet connectivity, as well as shortage of essential STEM facilities and laboratories. So even in Rwanda, who's spearheading with innovation across Africa, they only have 21.6% of secondary schools have laboratories. So this shows that there's a lot that needs to be done when creating the infrastructure for STEM and youth growth in Africa. So there needs to be targeted scholarships as an area of opportunity for young people and early exposure to STEM career opportunities, especially for young women. We also need to focus on changing the mindsets, challenge gender attitudes, and provide a supportive environment for girls. So we need more female STEM teachers who can serve as role models. So this is an area of opportunity. to inspire young girls to also pursue STEM because it's a male-dominated space. There also needs to be gender-responsive STEM initiatives. So like boot camps, incubators, accelerators, and other mentorship role programs. In East Africa, many countries, including Uganda, where I was working, Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania, are currently exposing girls to digital literacy, coding, big data, robotics, AI, and 3D printing. She Codes Africa, AfriLabs, and MasterCard Foundation are great examples of it, youth-led, but then also with the private sector working on youth unemployment. So it's important to recognize that there are areas of opportunity, but we need to, include women and girls in this fight. Thank you.
Thanks for emphasizing the need for the gender parity in terms of STEM. I agree with you completely. Now I'll jump over to Sandra. What do you think is the role of public-private partnership in advancing STEM? Given that we've heard a lot of the challenges that we need to do, the investments, the monitoring, we understand that collaboration is very key in advancing STEM education in Africa. So how can governments, the private sector, academia, and civil society work together effectively? And maybe while you're on that, if there are any successful models of public-private partnerships we can learn from, you can mention some.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think as you just mentioned in the questioning, to say collaboration is quite key. There's a lot of problems going around for only one party to be acting on them. So collaboration becomes effective. And I think one point, I think this actually links to the whole previous question that I answered on highlighting how innovation, entrepreneurship, and STEM education is connected, right? Public-private partnerships, for example, if you want STEM education to work, the truth of the matter is it cannot stop in classrooms, whether they're in primary school classrooms, secondary school classrooms, or university classrooms, because the capacity we have, as I read in the opening stats, to say 1:30 in secondary schools, if we're able to get our best 1:15, for them to keep ideating, innovating, and enterprising, whatever they're learning, to keep learning how to do it, will not be compacted with just one teacher. So this is where, for example, you have your CSOs coming in place, creating safe spaces outside that complement the formal education system, so that outside the classroom, the students can still come on board and learn and implement what they've learned in class in a space where you've got certain professionals that understand, let's say, for example, the business model, that understand how to incorporate whatever coding you've done to say, okay, this is how you then create revenue models in that sphere in place, right? So you've got, I think for an example, in my country where I work, we've got something called the Innovator Hub Clubs, which are safe spaces to allow young students to be able to come and ideate, innovate, fail, start again, because that's not the space you actually have in a lot of spaces. And that's a partnership right there. Might seem simple, but it makes the world of a difference when you have such spaces that exist, right? You also have the whole idea of, I think this was mentioned by Peter, to say industry academia. That is a really, really big area that we need to look at. Are we innovating in a vacuum? Because I've been in so many spaces where students they've come up with solutions, but they're not market-ready solutions. They're not addressing anything. And the whole problem comes to say we need to be creating that bridge between industry and academia. As we have our students, as we have STEM education going, what does industry actually need? How can we develop it? That was the development that I spoke about earlier, and that is quite fundamental. Again, we have done something called, with our government, called the Industry Academia Indaba, to try and bring about the conversation going, right? And I think one thing we keep saying is, a lot of times we're always saying government should do this, government should do that, but also government needs our support in whatever capacity we can provide. So when you come up with a proposal to say, hey, this is what we're doing in our sphere. How do you think we can work together? It might come out better to also assist where things are being done. So in my country, in Zimbabwe, our government, Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, has built innovation hubs, great infrastructure, amazing spaces, but administration-wise, there's an egg there. And that's why you come and you say, oh, this is where we're seeing the problems. Here's what we think we can do. And then you've got certain partners that are already doing something similar that you can learn from. UNDP has something called Timbuktu that is promising to be something revolutionary that they're doing, and you work together. So whatever efforts are being done, I strongly believe there's an equitable partner that's willing to work with you, depending on what you're willing to do. And the problems we currently face are so many that you cannot, again, as I said, just tackle them on your own. There needs to be that collaboration that I really have been speaking on. And I think just as a close off, for me, the example that I really love is the Tunisian way that they do the Startup Act and their startup system generally. So in 2018, Tunisia released their Startup Act. And how it was done was a matter of, it was a participatory approach where everyone was sort of asked in the startup space, like those that were in the actual industry itself, those that were implementing certain things, to say, what do you think we should do? And they enacted it on a participatory basis. In terms of government, then had to be taught what is happening on the sphere. I mean, they even had parliamentary sessions of training them. Implementation is being done by private sector. And in that act, you see that they say, oh, if you're going to support a startup, these are the certain tax incentives that you have. This is the sort of rebates that you get. This is the sort of support that the government can give you. They cannot give them money per se because government needs money, but they're coming in place say, let us also maybe cut off this that you can work with you. So it becomes an issue of, if you're going to be understanding the whole idea of public-private partnerships, everyone wants to win in some way. And that is the honest truth. We all have to understand, what value am I bringing, and then what value can I get out of it, and how can we all make it in a human way, because really all these problems can be tackled if we actually work together. So there's a lot of partnerships that are happening, and it's all really exciting. But one last thing that I would really love to actually see is youth partnerships, youth organization partnerships, because I think a lot of times we meet and we do certain things, but it would be great not to wait for a UN convent area, but to actually say, oh, that last time we're on a webinar, I met this person, we've been interacting on this way, and we're working on that. Because as the African youth, the ball really is in our hands to really act on how we want to do. And it might not be great steps, but it might make a great difference, however small it is.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And I think you are just reminding us that, collaboration is the new currency, as they often say. And what I like about it is that the conversation has already started, and we are seeing the birth of those collaboration through this platform that has been created. I've seen from the comments, others have been sharing their LinkedIn accounts so that we can collaborate from wherever we are and keep on igniting the conversation into this direction of making sure that we catapult and we carry the conversation on STEM and see how we can collaborate from afar, or even doing something together in our respective country. Peter, the stage has been set, a lot has been said, and I think it's very fair to say we are moving, and Africa has been poised for the fourth industrial revolution. And what could be some of the steps that we could take to ensure that STEM education remains adaptable and responsive to this evolving? Looking that the ball has been rolling, but we want to carry on engaging and making sure that it remains adaptable and responsive to this element of making it come appealing to all our constituents.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I think that I'm going to have to link this back to my initial submission, where I've said that it's clear abundantly that the first revolution, second and third, Africa missed out entirely on that. And our only shot at making it is if we can take advantage of the fourth. And so how can we do this? so that we don't miss out on this opportunity. So I think that one of the first things, and I think the most significant of all of them, is to ensure that what we teach, how it is taught, who teaches it, and all that is very significant. And I think it goes back to the idea that we need to decolonize education. And when we talk about, I mean, decolonizing it, it's almost become like a cliche to the extent that people just think that it's just one of those things. But clearly, what is taught in our class, how it is taught, and have an impact, if at all, STEM education, and if at all we can harness the significance of the fourth IR. So we're going to have to consciously, as nations, come together to understand that we need to reframe what is taught in our classrooms. We need to reframe how it is taught. We need to put more emphasis on building our cognitive, our ability to think clearly, critically. That is what would be useful in terms of engagement. I think I've said that this generation of young people, particularly Africans, are the most, have been met with the most competition. Why? We virtually compete for everything. We're competing for jobs, we're competing with, I mean, AI, we're competing with virtually everything. I think in our generation, we have got to deal with a lot more things than any other generation. With the advent of AFTA, for example, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, I've said to ourselves as young people that anybody at all can come to your country and compete with you for a job on merit. And if they're qualified for the job, they'll take it. So it opens up the question about how we harness our skill sets, how we harness our competences, and how we understand that opportunities are open to everybody to the extent that they have the competence to take it. And what it also means is that what we teach in our classroom must be equivalent to what is taught globally. So, for example, my competition is not just, I mean, anybody from the University of Ghana, from the University of, from Kwame Nkrumah and University of Science and Technology in Ghana. My competition is coming from Harvard, is coming from Yale, is coming from Stanford, MIT. Those are the people that I will have to compete with. So if I am taught in a way that does not make me globally competitive, then it cuts short my opportunities to compete at the global level. So the first place that we start from, if we're serious about harnessing the fourth IR, is going back to the classrooms. What is taught to young people? How is it taught? Who decides it? Who looks at the outcomes? Who is measuring it? Who is monitoring it? I think these are the very significant questions that we have to ask ourselves if we're to make any progress at all. Then I think that the other thing that is also very significant is, if at all, academia and industry are acting in silos, whether they're competing rather than cooperating. And I think that the sense that we can make out of this is that a lot of graduates come out and they're told that their skills are not fit for the industry. And the question is, if industry and academia are talking, how is it that I get an education, I get a skill set, I build a competence, and I'm told that somehow it's not relevant for the times that we're in? It only means that people are sitting in the university and are deciding what is important to be structured and taught in the classroom without speaking to the industry where it is required and needed. And to move this conversation forward, it will imply that somehow academia and industry will have to speak. They'll have to be having exchanges and co-creating what is to be taught in a classroom and how it should be taught. And I think that I'll end on the note of saying that the most significant thing that perhaps even overrides the initial ones that I've said is the involvement of young people and students in the decision making of what is taught to them, how it is taught, and everything. To the extent that we imagine that we can somehow just take something and dump it at all, is why it won't work. If somehow we co-create this, we co-design this, we co-make this happen, chances are that it stands a significant chance to work. So I think that these will be some of the things, if we decide that we look ahead and say that we want this to work, and we're serious about saying that we want this to work, we cannot miss out on any of these three. And I dare say that if Africa can realistically do these things, we stand a very good shot at taking advantage of the fourth IR and possibly leap forging whatever it is that has happened and bringing us afar in a global economy and allowing us to compete. So I think that those would be my concluding notes for now, and perhaps anything else that comes up. So,
Excellent.
you, Christopher.
Thank you so much, Peter, and our amazing panelists for all your amazing inputs. I'm motivated and inspired to really contribute to the STEM agenda in Africa. Now we're going to go to the Q&A session. And I see a number of questions that have been already posted on the Q&A function of the Zoom platform. So I'm going to take a stab at a few of them and open the floor to the panelists that want to address any of the questions that you may feel comfortable with. The first one, it says it's from Esatu Sar. It says, how can STEM education be leveraged not only to prepare youth for future employment, but also to foster critical thinking, creativity, and problem-solving skills that are essential for navigating the complexities of the fourth industrial revolution? I think Sandra has mentioned a bit of this, and I'll share my personal experience on this and then open the floor to the panelists. I did my undergraduate in electrical and computer engineering, and what I do now is completely different from what I studied then. So STEM education can really help shape even the discourse of development sphere. So I advanced my master's in development studies, focusing in Africa, and now I'm working in public health. And that STEM education has helped me really design and redefine how we approach development from a STEM lens. So it's very important to have those kind of experiences as well. And I think Sandra also mentioned she studied law and now she's doing STEM innovation. So it shouldn't just be, STEM should not just be left for employment, but to really shape how we, how young people lead the development that we want to advance on. So that would be my take, but I would open the floor to any of the panelists if you want to add a few points on this. If not, I can also, yeah, Sandra, go ahead.
Okay, I'll take a bit of it. And I think you just explained it really well, like when you just gave the answer. But then just to also add on to say, I think future employment as we imagine it might look totally different from what's existing now. And it's really fundamental to highlight that there's the key, as I mentioned, that the key skills that you're taught in STEM education are essential because they stimulate a certain part of your mind, but they have to keep on being developed as you grow on. Something that I'm always keen about and something that I've thought about is, why do we not have a database or an online database where young people can come together and collaborate and work together? Because I mean, the future that I'm seeing and thinking of right here in Zim and what you're seeing of in Morocco might be different, but they're going to intertwine some way. And if already we can work together on a platform and share our different thoughts around it, we can already be moving forward as far as we're developing. So that idea of collaboration, and not just collaboration from someone totally different in a different country to you, but around you. So STEM education has to be understood in the sphere that you're not going to exist as an island. You have to learn from other people because you're going to pick up skills that might put you in a different space where you never thought you would be. But because you learn from this person and you've been developing yourself, you are ready for what's coming because you've been taking snippets of different things. I think that's just a summary for me.
Thank you so much, Sandra. There's another question by Isatu, which is also similar to another question that was asked by Kwame. It's about inclusion. So I'll read the first one. How can STEM education be made more accessible and inclusive to marginalized or underserved communities in Africa, particularly in rural areas? That's the first one. But I'll read the second one that's in line with that one. How can technology be leveraged to bridge educational gaps and reach underprivileged or remote communities in Africa with quality STEM education? So I think, Rakia, you've mentioned a bit about inequality and bridging this gap, but I will also open it to the floor on how technology can be leveraged to really minimize this gap.
So can I jump in?
Yeah, Peter, go ahead.
Okay, sure. So I think I'll handle the first part of the question that talks about how do we get education to the rural areas, to the underserved and less privileged areas. I think I'll lean on Sandra's point about public-private partnerships. There's a sense that the government obviously cannot do it all. And it will imply that for the communities where there are companies, there are entities and organizations, this is where they come in. If we can set up the hubs away from the traditional education and support that by companies that operate in communities, and almost every community somehow has some major player over there. If at all we can work, I mean, government can find a way, or even CSOs, entities can find a way to put some pressure or a moral imperative on these institutions to develop the places that they are and equip them with the hubs that allow people to flourish and hone their skill set in this area. I think it would go a very long way to reach a government like that. But to put the entire obligation on government is setting ourselves up to fail. So the sense that I get is that we have to really leverage on the existing, partnerships that exist, and to let's start small, let's make the investment, and we'll see that it would spare up.
Yeah, I would like to also add on to that. So while I was working in Uganda on innovations for social change, we with UNFPA, we were partnering with different stakeholders, right? So talking about public-private partnerships, we were partnering with Outbox, which was an innovation hub. We were partnering with Ministry of Health and Gender, but also with CSOs. So while we were working with different young people in hard-to-reach areas in the north, with refugee settlements, but also in Kampala, we also, provided the mentorship. We connected them to Outbox, right? They were able to get the different trainings, were able to learn how to pitch. They started from ideation to scale up, which is really wonderful. A lot of the different initiatives for social issues, particularly for women's health and rights. Most notably, so there was a startup called SafePal. It was generated by a group of young people in Kampala, 4 people, and they came up with a solution to confidentially report gender-based violence cases with the CSOs, with the police, connecting young people, to the health services that they need. This was later on taken up by the Ministry of Gender, Labor, and Social Development and was scaled up throughout the whole country. So it's possible for youth to, have these platforms and to address social issues through these partnerships. And in the rural areas, we need to then bring these innovation hubs, the private sector, like MasterCard Foundation, all of these other entities, to these areas, giving people access, right? And building the infrastructure, including the internet connectivity and so forth. Thank you.
I'm also just going to jump in and I'll make it very brief.
I
And I think,
oh, okay.
sorry.
Yes, you can go on. You
Okay.
wanted to take a bite?
Yes, just a bit. I think as we envision what the solutions look like, let's not have a fairy tale vision of what it might look like, right? So a lot of times when you think of impact in the rural areas, you're already seeing this great partnership or this big space being created or this impact is being created. But sometimes I've just seen students who are privileged enough to be in private schools or maybe in public schools that have certain equipment, knowing something, going back on holiday and teaching back 10 students. That's already something you're looking at, right? I've seen people just coming in the little communities and doing something. So the difference that we want to see, we've got a part to play, and I keep emphasizing that as we wait for the bigger things, as we work towards the bigger things. And just to something we've done back in Zim with the operation that I work for. We've got something called the STEM Kumusha Emakaya, which literally means STEM to the rural areas. And what we did was we got a funding grant to just go around all the 10 provinces in our country teaching about STEM education. And the first year we bootstrapped, really tried hard, and it went sort of for, but people saw the impact. And the second year, the government came on board, different people came on board. But it began with that first step of saying, hey, we have a vision. Let's try and do what we can with the little bit that we have. And that's very fundamental, because at the end of the day, you actually being connected here means that you have more privilege than a lot of other people. So you can do a lot more with the bit that you have.
Super. And I see the passion and the burning from all our submissions. And this tells me that we are headed for the right directions with this, powerful convictions that we can all do a lot with in our respective industries and corner. And just maybe diving into the QA, there's a submission here from Seku Kamara. It's not a question. I think this also speaks to all of us to say, if you want them to shape the future and the lives of African youth, we need to recommend STEM included in national educational curriculum across Africa. And I think that also goes with we need to catch them while young at an early age. There's another question also from Emma Sally that states that asks that what strategies and initiative can we implement to effectively retain African youth talent and address the issue of brain drain in the continent. I'll repeat again. What strategies and initiatives can we implement to effectively retain African youth talent and address the issue of brain drain in the continent? So I'll just throw it to everyone just to take a bite on it.
Well, when it comes to the healthcare sector, we're seeing more and more, a lot of young people are moving away from working on the continent within the health sector. In Zimbabwe, actually, there's been an issue with human capital resources because people aren't getting paid. So we need to make it more attractive for young people to be going into these spaces. They need to have competitive salaries. There needs to be, I think, policies in place to ensure that. And again, women also need to be encouraged into coming into these STEM practices, right? So, if we're talking about, different initiatives, I think gender-focused initiatives are a great way to leverage more women to be, joining into this conversation, but also making sure that they're equally paid. So that's my perspective. But also, I think with intellectual property rights as well, if in certain countries they don't have the youth focused policies when it comes to like innovation, making it difficult for them to have the intellectual property rights for their different startups, and it's easier for them to be going outside of the continent, that's also an issue. So having this this environment that will foster innovation is really important.
I surely agree with your point, Rakia. I just want to add, I come from Ethiopia, and there are more Ethiopian doctors in the east coast of the US than in our country. That is a small portion of the United States, as opposed to 123 million people in Ethiopia. That's how much brain drain we're getting. Just to put things in perspective, to add on what you said on the health sector. So I see a few comments on the chat as well. Simple as that, pay employees, give them decent wage. And we really need to advocate for that, especially for young professionals to be retained in the continent. They need to get what they deserve, right? They need to get the compensation of what they can provide. Anyone else who would like to add?
I think this is not my area of expertise, but just a sentiment really to highlight that I don't think anyone enjoys living in a foreign country. Like home is based. I've spoken to a lot of other people that have left their countries and are living in foreign countries, and people get homesick. You want to be home, but the whole idea of you're not getting paid enough, it's not making sense, needs to be really corrected. And also appreciation of what you're doing. If you can link the work you're doing to a significance in the community, it makes a difference. One of my mentors helped build the first technology innovation hub in Southern Africa, which was in South Africa. And he says he didn't go outside because he was drawn to the idea of he's going to make a big change in the young people that existed. Like they presented the idea so well to them. So just also maybe the whole idea of Pan-Africanism actually being taught as we also being taught different things. What does it mean to be African, and what change are we making? And linking it all, and also just the descent page just has to also be there. But that also just needs to be inputted in to say how much of the bigger picture we're contributing to.
I really agree with that, Sandra. It's not only a matter of payment, but providing dignified work, right? Young people's contribution need to be meaningfully acknowledged. And like you said, they have to feel like they're contributing to the development of their country. So meaningful youth engagement is very crucial to retain talent. It's not about the pockets, but it's also if a person is valued in their country, if they think that their voice is heard, if they think that what they're contributing is actually moving the country forward, there's a high chance of retaining good talent in Africa. Any other last words from our panelists? I think we've addressed all of our questions in the Q&A section, except for Seku's comment. It's not a question, but a comment to reiterate that African countries need to develop new curriculum for pre-primary up to upper secondary education. This will include the utilization of ICT and other technologies to promote transferable skills, such as critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity, which was mentioned and is very in line with what all of you have said this evening or this morning where you are. Chris, you would like to ask any other questions to our panelists?
No, just before maybe the concluding remarks, just to give the floor to Camera. We can give you the floor. Yes, you go on.
Is it possible for the admins to let Seku in? Yeah, Seku, sorry. You can unmute and make your intervention. And we see also one more hand, Janet, to speak after Camera.
Hello, am I now?
You're breaking up a little bit. Can you try and speak more? No, we're having difficulties. Sorry, Camera. So let's pass over to Janet. Maybe you'll rejoin. Try one more time. If not, yeah, Janet, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Sorry with the noise at the background. I'm practically in a science lab. I took a...
Janet,
Can you hear me?
You can hear you now.
Yes,
Okay,
you
I'm
can
sorry
hear
for
Janet.
I'm sorry for the noise at the background. I'm practically in my
There's
lab.
no noise. Don't worry.
Yeah, I took a break to attend this because of my friend on the program. And amongst the many amazing things you guys talk about, I feel like one of the core, I'm speaking from my heart, core of the reason why Africa is still struggling in the place of innovation is because science is all about curiosity. Curiosity is enabled by exposure. Exposure is made possible by availability of resources. So in my country, for example, I'm Nigerian, less and less people take seriously some science courses because they do not see the practical aspect of what it is they are going to study in the university. And everybody is struggling. Everybody wants a career that would give them money, right? So a investment into making availability of resources at every level would skyrocket the curiosity and lead to innovative ideas that Africa needs to revolutionize our continent. I'm speaking because I remember when I was in my undergrad, I'm in South Africa now in a research lab happily doing my experiments because I was motivated to leave because when I was doing my final year projects in Nigeria, I was limited by the resources that was available in the lab. I was young, I had so much energy, I was excited about my project, but there was nobody to answer me. There was no resources to enable me try. You know, my supervisor here always, when we're going back and forth with ideas, she always said, oh, go and play around. I can only play around when there is enough reagents for me to play around, right? And there is no single invention that was just made by the first trial. The trial and error stage is very essential in curiosity and innovation, especially in science and technology. So in everything that we are doing, the core of it, as an emerging researcher myself, I can say is making resources available to enable curiosity and would lead us to that through that revolution that we really need as a continent. I just hope that I just look forward to an Africa where there is so much reagents, there's so much materials that is available at different levels for every child to play around to figure it out someday, somehow. Thank you.
Excellent point, Janet. I think that's one thing that we may have missed from this very rich panel. We really need to invest to create that platform to really nurture creativity and curiosity from the young age. And I'm sure that when you go back to Nigeria, you'll, at least in your power, you'll create that space for young people to wonder, be curious, and be creative to really contribute to STEM. And we really do call upon the public-private partners to really invest in availability of materials to enable this curiosity and advance it. I think camera is back. I quickly saw a hand up, but if he's not, we'll hand over to. Okay, he's back. Camera, go ahead.
I'm from Latvia and
Sorry, camera. We're still finding it very difficult to hear you, unfortunately. But at least you made your point very clear by leaving the comments in the Q&A section. So thank you so much for your input to emphasize that we need to really invest in new curriculums in Africa to include STEM from primary school. That point is well taken. And I would like to acknowledge that we are going to finish before the scheduled time because one of our panelists wasn't able to come, but we weren't short of this impeccable ideas that were flying around from our panelists, from our attendees. Thank you so much for your active participation and for your brilliant ideas. Now I'll hand over to Lebo for closing remarks and to take us away. Lebo, you have a huge homework to summarize all these amazing ideas.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in this very crucial conversation on the role of STEM in producing quality and decent jobs for young people in Africa. We're very grateful to the moderators for driving this dynamic conversation. Thank you so much, Britannia and Christopher. Also, huge thanks to our panelists, Sandra, Peter, and Rakia. We are sad that we missed Yasmina, but it's okay. You know, we made it work. Your insights have been so invaluable. You know, we cannot thank you enough. As our director, John Paul, stated in the beginning, that we need to radically change the current status quo of the learning poverty that we're experiencing on the continent. But with a vibrant youth that we have on the continent, acceleration is indeed possible. Sandra mentioned that usually when Africa receives funding from the Global North, it comes with the conditions of the Global North, thus restricting the extent to which we can solve our own problems. And since STEM is about solving problems and bringing solutions, as young Africans, our focus should really be on solving daily problems that our communities face. And this must come with collaboration because we need to create synergies and tap into each other's resources. For his part, Peter stated that we cannot argue that, the fact that we need to invest in STEM education and that it can uplift millions of Africans out of poverty. Africa has the potential to create, to be a manufacturing and production hub in STEM. And how can we do this? This is investment in building a skilled labor force. We should also not innovate for the sake of innovating. We should be solving problems and linking academia and practice. Rakia said that 70 to 90% of drugs in Africa have actually been imported. I was not actually aware of this. So thank you very much for that, because this is a wake-up call for all of us. And investment in this area, is and building a robust and localized pharmaceutical industry is imperative. And also early introduction to STEM education, such as coding, digital literacy, and data, because oftentimes we see on the continent that it is introduced way too late. And as one of our attendees mentioned, curiosity should be developed at a young age. And this is our closing. Please join us for the entire month of May, which is Africa Month. And during this month, the UN Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, African Union, and its partners, we are hosting a series of events which are both virtual, and we have an in-person high-level policy dialogue at the end of the month. Please check out our website for that information. And also join us next week for the second youth stage, which will be focusing on transforming education in Africa by leveraging innovative finance and digital revolution. Thank you very much, everybody. Until next week, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you.
Technical support team for the great support.
Thank you very much, everyone. Fantastic recommendation. Thank you.
See you next week. Thank you all.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you, Ruben. I'll see you next week.